Hi, I'm Coach Rob Wilby from Team Oxygen Addict. We've had a question in regarding sweet spot training, and the question basically says, I've read a little bit about sweet spot training but don't really understand what it is and how it's different from functional threshold training. So a great way to think about this is essentially sweet spot is a little bit less hard than training at functional threshold power. If you've got a power meter, we're looking at 90% of FTP rather than 100% of FTP for your traditional functional threshold training sessions. And in terms of if you're just using a heart rate monitor, we're probably looking in the region of 5 to 8 beats a minute lower than your functional threshold heart rate. So what is it and why do we use it? Well, essentially, you can get most of the return from training at functional threshold by training at sweet spot. It's that little bit easier, being in the realms of sort of 10% easier in terms of functional threshold power. But what you find is that you're going to be recovering from that session much, much faster. Now, if you imagine in your head a curve shaped like a mountain, the peak of that mountain is 100% of FTP. You're probably going to get the same training response just a little bit lower than functional threshold than you are just a little bit higher than functional threshold. And so a question often is, well, I know what my FTP power is. Surely I need to be training a little bit harder than that number in order to make that functional threshold improve. And it's true, you can do that by training in the 100 to 105% area. You will raise your functional threshold power. But what's also true, we've found, is that by training in the 90 to 95% area, you're also going to raise your functional threshold power. And I like to think of it as pushing the threshold from behind rather than lifting it from above. And the real benefit of going just a bit less than functional threshold is you're going to recover much, much faster. And most importantly, you can accumulate much more work in a given session training at sweet spot than you can training just above functional threshold. So as an example, most of my athletes can do about 30 minutes worth of training at FTP within an hour session, and then they're done for the day. They're really tired and that's it, it's time to pull the plug. However, what we found is they can probably accumulate 40 to 55 minutes of training at sweet spot and feel a little bit fresher at the end of the session. And so the big benefit there is they've received maybe 1.5 to 2 times the amount of training stimulus for the same kind of time invested in the training. And that means that essentially they're going to get much more bang for the buck in terms of training response for time spent training. So it is going to involve a little bit of sort of suspension of disbelief, the fact you can train a little bit easier but get more results from that. And it goes against what a lot of us think if we're very driven type A personalities. I'd encourage you to experiment with this, do a couple of these sessions and see how you feel. Real good way to go about it is one session I want you to train at 100 to 105% of FTP, one session I want you to train at 90 to 95% of FTP, and see how you feel at the end of that 30-minute main set. I'm pretty sure you're going to find you can accumulate more work in the same given time and train a bit longer and harder within that hour by training at sweet spot than you can by pushing yourself a little bit harder. And overall, that's going to mean you're actually going to get more training effect for the amount of time you've got to train. I hope this answers your question regarding sweet spot training, and thanks very much for tuning in.